Hello, I'm Cameron Bruce. I born and raised in Port Elgin, Ontario. I went to Afghanistan in 2008, 2009. I am a reservist with the Grey and Simcoe Foresters out of Owen Sound, Ontario. I was in Afghanistan in 2008, so September 2008 to April 2009. So I initially went as a force protection platoon. We had two tasks to do convoy escort for resupply convoys to the forward operating bases, and we were also rotated through guarding one of the main entry points into the Kandahar airfield called, I believe it was ECP-2 or 3. The Slovak army took over that task, and there was two platoons rotating between those tasks, and so our platoon was mainly infantry, so they were able to re-roll our platoon, split it up, and I got assigned with my section to the construction management organization, and so we provided security for a construction project of a irrigation canal, kind of a ditch. So when they built Route Summit between Fob Massamgar and Fob Wilson, they quickly built a road to put some presence in that area, and by virtue of doing that, they interrupted the irrigation canals the farmers had used. So the aim of the project was to correct the errors the construction of the road had created, and so they hired approximately 100 locals to do a lot of it by hand as a way to employ the local population, and they also had some heavy equipment, and so we provided security in with Blue Hack Prep Security, which was mainly Afghans, some Nepalese as well, Nepalese, I guess ex-Nepalese army personnel, and one British ex-soldier or as a private security contractor. And so we provide security for that construction project daily. So we were based out of Fob Wilson, we went down the road, Route Summit, and then we established our presence along Route Summit to facilitate the construction project, and the locals arrived and they did their work, and then at the end of the day we went back up to Fob Wilson. So it was interesting. There's this story I've told before. So we were in Fob Wilson is in Zari province in what we call Pajmal villages, and so prior to my tour, that was kind of the epicenter of a lot of the conflict. And so by the time I was there, now after I left, I don't know exactly what happened, but when I was there, we didn't have any contacts, and we were on the road every day. Partly maybe because we were employing the local population, we were able to do that. But one kind of interesting situation I would say I've told before is I was guarding an intersection to an offshoot of a fairly dirt road, and there was a gated compound, and there were some kids outside the gate that were just hanging about, and usually we assess kids as a low threat, and so they were allowed to kind of mingle closer to us. But older fellow, I'm gonna guess 16 years old, but you really couldn't tell you for sure, came out and he started getting close, and I was like, oh, back up, like and he kind of gave me a little bit of a teenage attitude. But then he opened his mouth, then he spoke to me in perfect English, and I was kind of stunned because one of the little kids, 3 or 4 years old, was saying something I didn't understand because they were speaking in Pashtun, yeah, sorry, and he said, oh, they're saying this, and I was kind of stunned because this place that's supposed to be kind of this very rural location in Afghanistan, he had the opportunity somewhere to learn English, and especially for a location where there are a lot of challenges for children getting education. It was just kind of a inspiring moment to know that at least, so sometimes I wonder what happened to that fellow. Who knows? He started pre-deployment training the week before I turned 18 years old. I spent just over a year in Petawawa doing pre-training. We went to Texas during the pre-training and Wainwright, Alberta to do some exercises. And then I think somewhere around maybe September 20th, I'm just throwing out that number, I left to go to Afghanistan and then arrived. We flew from, I don't know if it was Ottawa or Trenton. I think we stopped maybe in Glasgow as a stopover, but it was like just the airport. Like I saw the airport, that was it. The bar was not open. It's like 3 o'clock in the morning or something. And then we flew from there to Dubai. And so that's where Camp Mirage was not. And we got on from there, we got onto a C-17. And when you show up in Camp Mirage, that's where you get issued your plates for your frag vest. And you get, I think you got 5 magazines full of ammunition. And then you go onto the C-17. And the last hour of the flight, you're in your combat gear, your tactical vest, your full fighting order before it lands. And then typically they drop really quickly into Kandahar Airfield, I guess to maybe avert rockets. And so that one wasn't as bad as when I returned from HLTA, so my leave. The Herc dropped and I felt my stomach go into my chest. Dubai is really hot. Afghanistan, so once you hit the shock of Dubai, Afghanistan's not as hot. So September is starting to be fall, so it's not as hot as I understand summer was. But yeah, there was like the heat of the day. It was really warm. When I returned from Afghanistan in Dubai, our plane broke down on the runway in Dubai, and I got they said whatever was fixed, but the AC still wasn't working. So at 50 degrees, they put us on the Polaris aircraft, and it was ridiculously hot. And then they took us off because I guess whatever was broken, and then we got stuck there for 2 or 3 days and delayed our trip to Cyprus. Yeah, so in my platoon, we were all reservists initially, and so we came from all over Ontario as reservists as that platoon. We were the force protection platoon for the national support element. And then we did have some augmentation from regular force that as some soldiers were, life circumstance or whatnot, they weren't able to go on tour. We got replacements from regular force before we went to Afghanistan, and even in Afghanistan we got some replacements because I know one fellow got injured on leave. And so that was our kind of perspective, but certainly, when we were always that group of reservists, but we also, like when we went to FOB Wilson, it was the 3RCR November Company's FOB, and we were this section showing up that was kind of a reservist section. We had a particular patch for our unit, and they made fun of it, but it was kind of an internal joke. But yeah. I don't know. That's an interesting question because I'm just I think you appreciate that people are people, and that while people are different and it's easy to pick up on stereotypes, when you start talking to people, you understand people are people. A lot of people know English, which is I've already mentioned that before. I sometimes get nervous coming up to intersections because we used to have to cross this highway every day, and I was the one right side guard, and I wasn't on the internal comms on the vehicle, and so sometimes I was left out of the loop, and there's a vehicle coming, and that escalation of force, and whether you escalate or not, because the vehicle, they might have already talked on the comms that they're going to slow down and pick a new gap to go through, but I was kind of left out of the loop, so that kind of, sometimes when I drive up to an intersection of vehicles coming the other way, I sometimes, have a little bit of a moment, because there was a time where you escalate, and then it's easy, you try your best to, when you're firing warning shots in this case, you try your best to aim in a safe location, but just the way that weapon system works is there could be ricochets, and so you really don't know the result of that escalation. There's people walking down the road not too far from that, but I don't know. I guess nothing bad happened. We had a couple, but not too often. And then we reassessed how we were crossing the road and kind of changed our method. We just decided that we were going to try to slow down and wait for a gap in the traffic, because it was like, you're trying to cross Highway 21 or 26 and during rush hour, and you don't want to stop at the stop sign. That's what we were trying to do every day. So, yeah. I don't know. So I do remember, like, we left Afghanistan and we got on a C-17 and we went to Camp Mirage, and then the plane broke down. I do remember one of the, I think it's the Lodi on the C-17, asked me how old I was, because he was looking, because I looked young at the time. I was young. And then we did Cyprus for a couple days, and then I flew to Ottawa and had a night there, and then the next day I got on a flight to Toronto, and I was back. And I guess it was weird because there's so much attention to being someone who went to Afghanistan, and it was something that I didn't want to be like my sole identity. Hi, I'm Cameron, I went to Afghanistan. So I always and people, it's always strange to have people, thank you for your service, and that it's just kind of like, I didn't necessarily do it to get thanked for doing it. I kind of did it for a multitude of reasons, but I kind of always had the idea in my mind when I joined the reserves at 16 years old that I kind of wanted to do that, and I had certain ideas about what I was doing, and maybe those have changed since then, now that I'm not 19 years old, but what you can accomplish in the world and how you can accomplish it. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure it was different because, you're at home and we're there, you want to go to, even in Canada Airfield, you want to go to dinner, you gotta walk 600-800 meters to the closest kitchen, whereas now it's just in the house. So like, just a lot of used to be walking around and going places, and then you're in a home where like there's no reason to go anywhere, and so that was took a while to get used to. You're and I mean that still kind of comes in, like, not as often, but you're driving, and especially when you're younger, young men tend to be sometimes aggressive at driving, and so you kind of also are aggressive at driving, but also like in the back of your mind kind of have this like threat thing in your mind, so it's kind of a double amplified situation there. So yeah, like I joined the reserves at 16. I think like kind of going back into my mind, I think I thought that what we were doing in Afghanistan was helpful. Like, the Taliban regime seemed to be not good, and I thought that definitely we were doing something to try to elevate the country, and yeah. Yeah. So my father retired from the Army Reserves as a lieutenant colonel. When I was in Afghanistan, he was a major initially, but he did become the commanding officer of the Grand Simcoe Foresters, I believe, while I was in Afghanistan. He was appointed to acting, and then as the commanding officer went on a tour, I believe, a tour of duty somewhere else, and so he was stepped up temporarily, and then eventually became the commanding officer when I returned home. I believe that's, at least my timeline is correct. And then, so, I think he understood it more than maybe some other family members, but yeah, it's kind of interesting that, you have your own idea, and especially when you're a younger person, you kind of are very, what's the word? Not selfish, but like, just you think about yourself, right? And so you want to do this. This is what you want to do. You don't necessarily like consider the impact or the risk you're taking. You have that invincibility concept in your mind, and so when other people are worrying, I don't think I ever really effectively processed the risk there until maybe I was in Afghanistan, and even then, it was just kind of this, well, if something happens, it happens. But yeah, so yeah, there was concern. I mean, I got the. I was actually just looking before I came last night, just trying to look at old stuff, and I was looking for these patches, and I found them on the. I still have my Arid CAD pad. Probably not supposed to, but I still do. And then found in it, I found a notepad, and it had a pinhole because someone had given me a guardian angel. I think it was my aunt, or maybe my sister gave me a guardian angel, so I had two of them. But I'll be honest, I did it for them, not for me. I didn't feel like it was going to do anything for me, but I did it because they wanted it, so I did it. So yeah, and certainly I think it does affect other people's identity as well, because then your mother becomes the mother with a son in Afghanistan, or your sister becomes the sister with a brother in Afghanistan. So not only when I returned home, I felt this didn't really want to have everyone acknowledging what I had done. I didn't want to showboat it, but at the same time, they're also forced into being somewhat of, especially in a small community like Port Elgin, everyone kind of knows you, and then they know your son's in Afghanistan. So it's kind of a interesting situation in that regard. On a convoy stop, and the adrenaline was rushing, and I think it was more nervousness about doing your job correctly. And when you're faced with especially and that was an issue every day, right? So every day we would do our vital point search. So we're searching up the road. We're the first people up that road looking for IEDs, and you don't want to be the person that something goes boom and it was your job to catch that and you missed it. Or escalation of force is how do you judge someone's just someone that maybe didn't understand the communication versus someone that maybe is a suicide bomber. And both directions are bad choices, because if you escalate and you end up applying lethal force or shooting them, and they were just someone that didn't understand your direction, that's an issue. It's kind of a big mistake. But the other way is if you are lax about that, and something does happen again, that escalation of force, I think that was a stressful thing every day, was waking up and walking down that same road and clearing that same path and worrying about what different factor is going to be present this day and how are you going to react to it and decide effectively in the moment. I think, I don't know if lucky is the right word. I don't think, certainly I had some hypervigilance and certainly, there's times where, I think about stuff, but I don't think largely I've had as challenges as some of my peers. And so that's something that's certainly interesting concept, is as you go on, faces you saw, whether in Afghanistan or people you worked with, or people you've worked with maybe on that pre-training, and seeing them pop up on the news, a story about them struggling with OSI, or unfortunately people that have made a decision to take their own lives, and that's not just been one, but there's been multitudes, and not really having connections with them. There's one fellow I saw once in a mess a couple years prior, and then somebody sent a message on Facebook, and there was a news story about someone, but I didn't know who it was, and then all of a sudden that was that person that had unfortunately made that decision. And so it's kind of interesting, the legacy, especially at 19, you don't really think about a legacy or whatnot, and then seeing your peers and people you've interacted with and what they've struggled with as the years have gone on. I don't think so, no. Sometimes I think okay, well, if I didn't do that, would I have, maybe I would have gone to school right off the bat, and then I would have been, in a different direction. But I don't, you can't really regret the choices you make in that regard. Do I wish that what's happened in Afghanistan is different? I think, there's a lot of good people in that country, and I hope the best for them. But right now, it's kind of uncertain the direction that country is going. I think there's an impact, regardless of maybe more recent events. I think, I would hope that the reputation of Canadians is different than maybe even some of the allies we worked with, but also the reputations of the past Soviet army, because oftentimes people suggest that a local Afghan might not discern the difference between a Soviet soldier versus American but I think we set a good reputation and demonstrated Canadian values while we were operationally engaged in Afghanistan. I think as an individual that we carried the values of a Canadian and showed that country who we are as Canadians. To be honest, it's kind of been a situation where not too many people ask, my friends, everyone knows, but it's not a subject I bring up a lot, and it's not something I don't say, hey, I'm Cameron, I went to Afghanistan 12 years ago. And that's kind of the other incredible thing is how long ago it was now. If you really look at it, it was over a decade ago, and so it's not something that I tend to bring up. It's not something that I feel like it defined my identity. But I'm just trying to think if there's anything super exciting. I don't know. It's interesting because certainly, even now you're going I don't consider myself part of history, and yet this exhibit is happening. And then you think, well, it is 12 years ago. I know that certainly Billy Bishop Museum covers, and it is good to spend that time to archive or record some of that, because if not, where does that go? So it is important to do that. I don't know if right time. It's kind of an interesting time. Because there's been some things. I guess it could be because it's an interesting because this September was the 20-year mark of September 11th, and as that kind of happens, there was, I know the War Museum in Ottawa years and years ago had a more Afghanistan exhibit, and I haven't been there in years, so I don't know exactly what they have there, but that memorialization, I think it's good to keep reviewing that. I think it's interesting in retrospect because sometimes you look at faces, because when you're in Afghanistan, there's the casualties. Actually, I believe, misquote, but that we were one of the highest casualties for winter season. So we were in the winter season. It was considered to be more, less violent during that period of time. The commanders, I think, made some decisions of what specific subunit would go to what geographic location, and actually the location that things didn't come out as they thought would happen in terms of the regions that had more issues. So I was in Zari district, and below that's Panjwai district, and were kind of all Panjwai. And my understanding is Zari had more of the casualties during my tour, when it was estimated that Panjwai district was going to be more of but that might have just been because where they were pushing into and what areas they were patrolling in. They didn't engage with the places in Panjwai that maybe still had deep-seated, I don't know whether it's Taliban or just were not pro ISAF at the time. But so it's kind of interesting. I guess what I was saying is you look at faces and you start realizing, oh wait, I remember that guy from pre-training. We do theater mission specific training, and it was stand. So you go to and you learn how to do combat first aid, and we have our platoon, but then someone else from another unit's also doing it all the same day. So you recognize a face or whatnot that was there at the same time, and so sometimes it's interesting too because you know what happened, but maybe as a corporal you're not as aware as what all was happening at the time, and so you're thinking back and you wish you had more awareness of what was going on, right? It is interesting. I know Boxing Day was an interesting day. I think I don't know how many IEDs went off, but I think there were kind of a bunch of IEDs went off that day, and so I was TCCC qualified, so Tactical Combat Casualty Care qualified. So in the FOB, we were supposed to go to the trauma center if there was some sort of situation. And so usually it's Afghan National Army or Afghan National Police that were coming to there, and they would evacuate them from the FOB as opposed to on site, just because they wanted a secure landing spot for those casualties. And so we were on deck. I didn't really get to participate in any sort of triaging or whatnot, but the potential was there, and oftentimes there was more than enough people there when I was there. And then the times where there wasn't enough people, I think it was because a lot of the people were outside of the wire at the time or outside the FOB, and so they just didn't have a lot of people at the time. So.